Well, let me just say regarding Big Frank, I think one of the major points of the book, and I know Jessica has, this is why she thinks Big Frank is the main character, is that if you look at the first two books, it's really not until the third book that I think we get the overtures from Carlo Gambino that he would back a takeover by Big Frank of the Maravelli family if he was to get rid of Paulie. Um, I don't think if you watch or read any of the scenes in book one or even in the war against the Foundation, we don't really get any hints that Big Frank has the ambition. Clearly, he probably does. Anyone in the number two position at some point is going to dream of being number one. But it's the killing of Ass Rape Delicious Boy. It's the poisoning of the rivers with the pollution, and a number of other little scenes of inhumanity that seem to be something that Paulie is totally oblivious to, where Big Frank is, that makes Big Frank, it seems, want to do things a different way. But by the time that he actually works up the idea in his mind and knows that he's not going to face retribution from other families by knocking off his boss, Big Frank has become as bad as Paulie. So there's the sense that from 1960 to 68, the time frame that the book is set in, that Big Frank has slid. And we don't, it seems that in 1960, 61, 62, he's totally loyal to Paulie. Then he maybe starts having doubts. By 64, 65, he knows that eventually he's going to have to replace Paulie. He knows that Paulie is probably, I think he has an idea that Paulie has the prostate cancer, so he probably thinks he can just wait it out. And then at some point in 66, late 66, 67, 68, he's like, fuck it, he could live another 10 years. I'm taking over. And so I think that Big Frank, I don't think that Big Frank is aware of I mean, at a certain internal level, maybe he knows that he wants to be number one, but I don't think the reader really gets a sense of that. When you're reading about the war with the Foundation, I don't think you have any idea that there's any internal struggle going on with Big Frank or Paulie.
No, you don't from this book. Although if you tie in the Machete brothers, you obviously infer things even before that, and you kind of make up a narrative.
It's stated right there. He killed Paulie, so we know going into this book that Big Frank kills Paulie. And it's even stated in the beginning of this book as well. Just like we know that Big Frank eventually ends up dying in 2014. Because it's not important to know the brute facts. The brute facts are just the facts. It's how the facts come about. That's what makes the fiction. But
well, I wouldn't agree with Jessica when she says that Big Frank is the main character. I do think he is the most complex character.
Yeah.
Outside of maybe the over voices, he has the most irredeemable qualities of Paulie, but he has far more insight than Paulie. It seems like into himself, into other things as well.
Yeah.
Whereas Paulie is, as you stated, is a psychopath, and it just seems that Paulie has more genuinely affecting moments, especially in his interactions with Big Frank, than Big Frank has with anyone. He's so duplicitous in a lot of the things he does, and it may be just that since I know how he becomes, I often wonder if he had all these ideas at the very beginning, even if we're talking about how it's just been one thing after the other with Paulie, where he's kind of supplied the fact that he needs to take over at this point. I think that he may have just waited it out until Paulie basically destroyed himself and then used that as justification for what he was going to do.
Yeah.
So the intermission is at 18:59. And this is a very interesting intermission as compared to the first two. So the first two, you use basically trailers and teasers in the first one. The second one is sections that you took out of Scorpion Swam. This one is like a deleted scenes thing, where you'll take edited out version, and it's interesting to see the deleted scenes, but it's also a comment on what is unneeded in certain sections.
Yeah.
Do you keep most of your? Do you keep all of your drafts and then as fodder for things like this?
No, this was made up. These are fake deleted scenes. These are not scenes
Oh,
I
okay.
cut. I just knew I needed deleted scenes, so I made up these deleted scenes.
So you would just put in a song randomly, or an extra farting scene, or someone
Yeah, and
dying.
it goes to show you, because some of these things clearly don't belong in the scenes that they are ostensibly excised from, and it shows you, I think, how a worse writer, a bad writer, could really fuck up the structure of the things that I do. I mean, I could not, for the life of me, imagine what a Toni Morrison or a Jonathan Franzen. Could you imagine them, even if you gave them the skeleton, the outline, and this is what's going to happen in this chapter, and you gave them a syllabus of each of my chapters, how differently they would write a book like this, and how totally they would fuck it up.
Yeah, you could say just color within the lines, and then
Yeah.
they'd supply the wrong colors for everything. It's an interesting thing. I have probably the least to say of this particular section, because they are just deleted scenes. When people read them, they'll be able to get the general idea of why certain things didn't work. There are some things where you show how an extra adjective may be different. So again, it's comments on art like this that are very subtle. It's kind of the critic in you in this particular section.
Yeah. The one thing
do you have anything else to say about this intermission?
The one thing, though, that this deleted scenes has, it also serves. For example, there are deleted scenes from chapters that come after this section of the book, so you get a little bit of foreshadowing too, and it's a way to foreshadow in a totally unique kind of way. Foreshadowing is usually done in fiction by having scenes earlier that allude to something coming up. But here I am taking whole scenes and throwing in deletions from that foreshadow things to come. And it's totally meta, and it's, again, a totally unique thing. As far as I know, no postmodern writer has ever done anything like this, and not done anything as effectively in this way. The reason for the deletion. So, for example, here we have it ends with the reason. The book features several scenes of Paulie Marabello just losing it out of nowhere and simply shooting someone dead, including Artie DeBruzzo and ass-raped delicious boy Joey Sistrunk. But in their cases, one minimally state that they had aggravated Paulie, no matter how minimally. Sistrunk had been bullied by Paulie and cursed him out, whereas DeBruzzo pushed Paulie's buttons, arguing over cookie provenance. Even just that 2 words, cookie provenance, is such a ridiculous thing. By contrast, the seeming death of a heretofore unseen character with minimal dialogue, head cook Phil Bacatello, seemed too abrupt and portrayed Paulie as so mentally unstable that to believe he had lasted decades without being brought down by rousing law enforcement seemed unrealistic. So you get some of these reductio ad absurdums within these deleted scenes, and then you get what ends up to be sort of a didactic little paragraph that ends them, that explains the reasons for the deletions. And again, you can say that this could be how far out of the actual narrative is this? Is this Dan Schneider writing it? Are these deleted scenes within the manuscript of Manny Cole? Are these insertions put in by Elaine Shaw, the editor? Or is this yet another meta thing? Are all of these deleted scenes yet another voice speaking outside? And you can look at it one way or the other, but that's what makes the book. This book is just Mobius loop after Mobius loop. Imagine like if you had a 3-dimensional Jackson Pollock painting, but instead of just lines, just literal lines dashing in and out, you have narrative constantly going back in, feeding itself, tying things up in knots, untying knots, leaving loose ends, but then tying them up again in not just a static painting, but in a film that the thing is constantly moving. It's like the narrative of this book is like an atomic shell of electrons constantly moving. It's all over the place, but the electrons never bump into each other. They're constantly worrying about the nucleus. But yeah, so that's basically it.
And then one last comment on Big Frank. You said that you'll never return to him again. There are some scenes of his childhood that we didn't get to, especially between him and his brother, both in his childhood and then later in life.
Yeah.
He does have an intriguing background, but is it one of those things that is just more with less?
Yes. Initially, I had the idea coming out of the Vincetti brothers that I was going to expand on Big Frank, because Big Frank only appears, I think, totally in one chapter, and I think, no, maybe two. And then
he has a very long chapter and extended dialogue in Vincetti Brothers. He is a very major player.
Yeah, and then I think he just appears in one or two others in a brief way. But I was going to expand upon his childhood. I think he's got mostly sisters. I forget how many. He's got his brother Concetto, who he ends up killing, which in a sense, leads to foreshadowing, because if he can kill his actual brother, why wouldn't he be able to kill Paulie? And then it's one of those things, like I said, about the character of the girlfriend of the spy in this last book that I finished, is sometimes more is less, because it's not that I couldn't have written affecting scenes or some interesting things that maybe his sister said to him that had some effect on Big Frank and blah, 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 blah. But was there any real necessity for it? I don't know if there would have been the dramatic necessity for it. So by leaving that blank, it helps, I think, involve the reader a bit more, especially when you give them so much. You don't want to overwhelm them